Welcome back again. This is part 2 of the Docker series. In the previous tutorial, we learned how Docker images and the Docker containers are and how to Dockerize both new and the existing ASP.NET Core apps using the DockerFile. If you haven't watched the part 1, link is in description. Please watch that first. So in this tutorial, we will learn how to build Docker images and containers using the DockerFile commands and how to build and run the ASP.NET Core app inside the container. So let's go to the table of content of this series. Firstly, we will learn about the container registry and the Docker base image, and then we will create the Docker image for running the ASP.NET Core app, and then Docker images for developing ASP.NET Core app, and then learn about the dockerignore file, and then finally build the Docker images for the ASP.NET Core app running inside a container. Then finally we will learn how to clean up our Docker images and the containers. So let's start with the container registry. It is a centralized storage system used to store and manage container images. They play an important role in the container workflows, making it easier to share, manage and deploy container images efficiently and securely. Currently, several cloud-based and the self-hosted container registries are available. Some popular container registry services are Docker Hub, Google Container Registry, Amazon Elastic Container Registry, that is we known as ECR, and the Azure Container Registry. So let's move on to the Docker base image. Docker base image are a fundamental part of the containerization process, and they serve as a foundation for building a containerized application. A base image contain a minimum OS, that is operating system, with the libraries and the dependencies needed to run a particular type of application. Docker base images are typically pulled from a container registry like the Docker Hub and serves as a starting point for building custom Docker images. Now let's switch to the Visual Studio to understand the DockerFile. So let's switch to the Visual Studio. Let's create one new application for this tutorial. So I am using .NET 7.0. I am enabling my enable Docker option and using the Linux OS. Click on create. It will create an application for you with all the initial and the default template that we have for the DockerFile. So basically DockerFile is used by the Docker build commands to create a container image. You can add the Docker file to the root of the folder of the project and start writing the instruction to build the Docker images. Docker build images automatically by reading the instruction from a Docker file. So if you just see over there, a default Docker file is already there, right? When we choose the option enable Docker. So if you simply open it, so let's first try to understand what are the commands that have with us. So let me do it for you. Okay, so let's go the commands one by one. Firstly is choosing the base image. The first instruction in the Docker file usually a from in the instruction, as you can see over here. Okay, so the from instruction initialize a new build stage and sets the base image for the subsequent instruction. The from keyword requires a fully qualified Docker container image name. Optionally, a name can be begun to give a new build stage by adding as. Here you can see as keyword, right? Name to the from instruction. We also named this build stage as a base in case we need to be refer it to the later names. If you are using the Visual Studio, you will also get a benefit or built-in intelligence that will help you writing the Docker instructions using the correct syntax and arguments to it. Now the next command available is the working app directory. If you can see, let me highlight it for you. So the working directory instruction sets the working directory for the subsequent instruction, that is the run, cmd, entry point, copy and add in the Docker file. If you not specify this working instruction in the Docker file, it will create it automatically even if it is not used any subsequent Dockerfile instruction. The working directory instruction can be used multiple times in a Dockerfile. As you can see, the command is in front of you, right? The next step is to exposing the ports. So the expose instruction informs the Docker that the containers listens the specified network port at runtime. We can specify whether the port listens on TCP or UDP. By default, it is listen on the TCP protocol if you are not specifying any protocol on it. It functions as a type of documentation between the person who built the image and the person who run the container, about which the port are intended to be published. So to actually, if we have to understand, publish the port when running the container using the P flag when we are running the docker run command, that we will later get to know when we are actually running this command. But for now, just try to understand these are the expose posts that we have exposed it over here. Now the next step is like basically to create the Docker image for the developing ASP.NET Core app, right? So we can also build the Docker images for developing environment, which is usually require a different base image, libraries and dependencies. So let's go through with it step by step. So here they are the same. Firstly, we have to choose the base image, right? So after choosing a base image, you can basically specify the working directory of it, right? And then finally adding project file to the Docker image. Here you can see the copy command. So we are copying it. Our project name is ASP.NET Core Docker Demo App. So we are copied from there, right? The copy instruction copies files or directory from the local file system and add them to the file system of the container. Usually we provide both source and the destination path to the copy command. In the following command, we are copying the project file name as the ASP.NET Core Demo, add to the source working directory inside the container. Now the next step is restoring the project dependencies, as you can see over here. So a .NET project typically references external libraries in the NuGet packages that provide additional functionality to our app. These external dependencies are referred in the project file, like the csproj and the bbproj based upon the language that you are using. When you run the .NET restore command, the .NET CLI uses NuGet to look for these dependencies and download if necessary. It also ensures that all the dependencies required by the project are compatible with each other and that there are no conflict between them. Once the command is completed, all the dependencies required by the project are available in the local cache and can be used by the .NET CLI to build and run the application. Now the next command is the copy, that is the working directory. Now the next is the run instruction, is used to execute any command in a new layer on the top of the current image and commits the result. The resulting committed image will be used by the next step in the Docker file, basically over here. Here you can see, here we are building our .NET build using these options that I have highlighted. We are releasing build. Okay. Now at this point of time, our application is built. Now adding applications to the Docker file. Once all the dependencies are restored, we can start copy it all the project files. Here you can see over here on line number 12 we have a copy dot command that is actually copying your dependencies. Then finally here is the working directory, and then we build as a source one. Working directory we set it as a source, and then we have a command where we are running our .NET build. Okay. Now the next command is the run .NET build. Okay. So to build our application, we can use this command in the Docker image. The current argument here we have mentioned like -c. So C argument specify the configuration, for example the release, and O argument specifies the output directory where all the binaries has been copied. So C stands for the configuration and O stands for the output directory where you have to be copy it, right? Now our development base image configuration stage is now completed. Now moving toward the publishing uh, image of the Docker. Now the first instruction here is the initialization of the new build using the publish by referring a previous stage build by a name. Okay, over here you can see from the build as publish, this one. Now we run this command with these configuration options over there, and here we have the different set of flags associated with it. So firstly what we are doing is we are specifying our .NET directory that we have to be build it, and then configuration and the output path where we have to be host it, right? And finally all the publish the resulting set of the file directories in the respective directory where we have all the files. Now ultimately by specifying the application execution entry point, that is the next step. If you will see the next 4 commands, this relates to the entry point of the application. Now we are ready to run our application in the Docker container. For this we need to be specify a new build stage. This is very important. So let's try to understand these commands. First is the first instruction is initialize a new build stage. Here you can see from base that we have defined over here, and we are give it a name as final, right? We are now setting the working directory which is on the line number 20, that is /app, right? Now after we set it, we are copying the application binary from the app publish folder to the working directory, and then here you can see we copy everything to the publishing directory, and then we are specifying which is the last command, that is the entry point command, which allows us to configure a container that will run as executable. The entry point commands takes an array that transform into a command line invocation with the arguments. The command has the following syntax where the first argument specifies the name of the executable, which is this, and then in our case we specified our executable as .NET, and then we provides the DLL file of our project as a parameter to it, right? You can see over here we specified our project file. It means it will invoke the .NET ASP core docker demo app.dll on the command line when we run the commands to run the Docker container, right? So this is all about the Docker file. Now moving towards the, we have one more file inside it which is a dockerignore. So the dockerignore is very much similar to the gitignore file used in the version control system like the git. It is used by the Docker projects to specify which files and the directory should be excluded when building a Docker image. If I zoom it, you can see here the class path, dockerignore, env, gitignore. These are the files that you want to be ignore when you are building your Docker image. So you can mention as many files as you want to be ignore it by creating a container or the image of the Docker, right? So now our next step is to building Docker image for the ASP.NET Core app that we have. For this, what you need to go is go to the actual directory where this Docker file exists. Here you can see we have a Docker file inside of it, right? Go to the address bar, type cmd. So cmd will be open for this path over here, right? So now over here what we have to type is to create an image using the docker build commands in the folder where the actual Docker file is. We will use the command that is docker build and then specifying -t and the app name that I want to be show. In my case I am giving my ASP.NET Docker app. Okay, so if we are trying to understand dash t to give our image name, that is in our case, that is as I told you, my ASP.NET Docker app is the image name. To just mention it, this is my Docker image name. Okay, so once you hit enter, okay, we get, okay, I mistakenly pressed the X. So the command is docker build dash t and then my ASP.NET Core app and then finally a dot at the end. The last argument dot means tells the docker command to build commands where to find the docker file. Since we are in the current working directory, so we are using dot. Now press enter. You will see this command will start triggering and building your docker application over here. Okay, you will see all the files and the logs. Once all the commands in the docker files are executed, you will see the successful message on the bottom of it. Okay, this means everything is good and we have an image that you can check by running the following commands. That is your docker images that we just do after it completes. So it completes fine. So next image to check is docker images. Don't worry about the command, it will in the description. So press enter. Here you can see you have your container ready, that is the myapp.net docker app. If you can also check it, open the docker, you will see your container is ready now, right? Now at this point of time we have our image ready. Now the next step is running ASP.NET Core app in the container. Now since we have the image that contains our application code, dependencies, everything else that we need to run our application. Now we are ready to create our Docker container with the help of image. Okay. Now we will run the command docker run dash d dash p and then specifying the port that I want 8080 and 80. Okay, and then I'm giving a name that you can say my app, you can give any name to it, and finally my ASP net docker app. This is your container name actually that we just created in the previous step over here, my ASP.NET Docker app. Let's try to understand this command. This command is docker run space dash d. D option specifies that we want to run the container in the background. Next is dash p options bind your internal container port 80 to the external host machine port with 8080 and then space dash name. So name option is used to give a container a name. If you don't specify a name, one will otherwise will be generated for us automatically by the docker itself. Having a name makes it easier to reference it later when we have to be clean up. The last argument is the image name that I already told you that we just created, my ASP.NET Docker app. You have to be mention it over here. Okay, now hit enter. Here you have the unique ID. Okay, now to check if our container is created and running, we can use the command docker ps. Press enter. Here you can see your all the containers with their IDs are running over here. You can also check it using the docker app. Here you can see, just click on refresh and now you have our my ASP.NET Docker app and it is in use and you have their sizes and the correspondingly action to it. Okay. Now at this point of time we hosted our application. If you simply go to your browser, okay, over here you can see, simply type localhost 8080 and press enter. Now you can see your application is up and running, although you can see I am not running a Visual Studio. So in the previous part we are running our application using this configuration docker Now in this tutorial we will learn how to generate a Docker image and then container, and finally host your Docker container and then run your application. You can see your application is up and running, right? Now we learn how to generate a Docker image, container and deploy our application on the Docker. Now one final step that we are going to learn here is how to clean up Docker images and container. Right now we have created the image and the container that is up and running. However, when working with the Docker, you can end up piling up unused images and the container and the data set that clutters the output and take the disk space also. The good news is Docker offer useful tools to help you clean up your system and stay organized. So let's run some of the commands to do that. So let me clear this command window so that it can be clear for you. So first of all we have to stop the Docker containers. So for that simply type Docker and then container and then put a command stop and then whatever the name you have specified in the last step. Myapp I gaming it, so it will be stopped. Now Docker container rm for removing the Docker container and give it a name of the container. Okay, center you will see. Okay, oh I misspelled that container spelling, give it a second. Container. So here it is removed. So if you want to be remove all the image, now simply go over there, refresh. So it is unused container now, right? Now so finally removing the Docker image that we have, for that we have a command docker rmi removing the image, and my image name is myaspnetdockerapp. Next, it is untagged and deleted. Now if you go to the Docker and refresh it, you will see only the two apps over there. Our created container is now gone, images is gone now, okay, whatever we have created it. So in this way, if you want to be remove all the images that you have, so you have to be simply type the command docker rmi and then dollar syntax and then docker images and dash q. Okay, that's it, and then press enter. This single command will clean up all your dangling resources such as the images, container, volume and network not tagged or connected to any container. This is a quick way to get rid of the old images, container, volumes and the network that are not associated with anyone. Okay, any of the container that you have. So right now it is says queue is not defined, so we can check that with the command docker rmi help. You will simply type it and you will get to know. Okay, so in this tutorial we will learn the content of the DockerFile in detail, and we learn how to specify the base image, how to copy files from the local system to the Docker images, and how to run the commands using the CLI for the Docker build generation process. So we also learned that how to clean the Docker images and the container, and finally how to create and run the ASP.NET Core app inside a Docker container. I hope you found this post useful. If you have any comments or the suggestion, please leave your comments below. Don't forget to share this tutorial with your friend or community. In the next session we will learn how to use or host our SQL Server connected app with our ASP.NET Core app, which is the part 3 of this series, which is the last lecture of the Docker series. So see you there.